Did you ever listen to an Elvis song and cringe at how it sounds today? Have you wondered why some of his recordings don't hit the same way they did decades ago? Number 8. Suspicious Minds, 1969. The Fade That Never Ends. Ever been annoyed by a song that fades out only to fade back in again for no reason? That's exactly what happens on one of Elvis's biggest hits. Suspicious Minds stands as one of Elvis Presley's most beloved comeback singles from 1969, a soulful gem that showcased his stunning vocal abilities after years of making mediocre movies. The song itself is nearly perfect, emotionally raw, beautifully performed, and featuring an incredible backing band. But there's one production choice that has left listeners scratching their heads for over 50 years. That bizarre fade-out, fade-in section near the end. Around the 3:36 mark, producer Felton Jarvis decided to fade the song out, creating the impression it was ending only to bring it back seconds later. This artificial manipulation of volume feels incredibly dated and disrupts the emotional flow of an otherwise flawless recording. According to music historians, this unusual choice stemmed from a feud between Jarvis and Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker, over song length. Parker wanted shorter songs for more radio play, while Jarvis wanted to preserve Elvis's extended performance. The producer's solution. This awkward fade-out, fade-in trick that was supposed to fool radio programmers about the song's true length. Modern listeners often find this moment jarring and unnecessary, a strange becket of late 1960s production techniques and behind-the-scenes music industry politics that interrupts what could have been a perfect recording. Imagine if this iconic song had been allowed to build naturally to its conclusion without this dated production gimmick. The fade manipulation stands as a reminder of how even timeless performances can be marred by trendy production decisions that don't stand the test of time. Number 7. In the Ghetto, 1969, Those Syrupy Strings. Have you ever noticed how the string section in this emotional ballad sounds more like a soap opera soundtrack than a powerful social statement? In the Ghetto represented an important moment in Elvis's career. A socially conscious song addressing poverty and systemic inequalities at a time when such topics rarely appeared in mainstream pop music. Written by Mac Davis, the song tells the heartbreaking story of a boy born into the cycle of poverty and violence. While Elvis's vocal performance remains moving and sincere, the string arrangement surrounding it hasn't aged nearly as well. The orchestral accompaniment, particularly the string section, drips with a melodramatic quality that modern ears often find excessive and manipulative. Rather than allowing the powerful lyrics and Elvis's emotion-filled delivery to convey the message, producer Felton Jarvis layered on thick syrupy strings that swelled dramatically throughout the song. This approach was common in late 1960s, adult-oriented pop productions, but today it comes across as heavy-handed and distracting. What makes this production choice particularly unfortunate is that it undermines the serious social message of the song. The arrangement treats this story of urban poverty with the same saccharine string treatment that might accompany a love ballad, creating a disconnect between the gritty subject matter and its glossy presentation. Modern productions of songs with similar themes tend to use more restrained, authentic instrumentation that doesn't overwhelm the narrative. Elvis historian Ernst Jorgensen noted that Presley rarely had much input on the orchestration of his recordings during this period, focusing primarily on his vocal performance while leaving arrangement decisions to his producers. One can only wonder how this powerful song might sound if recorded with a more subtle, less dated production approach that would allow the storytelling to stand on its own merits. Number 6. Way Down, 1977. The Artificial Echo Chamber. Did you know Elvis's final hit single was processed through so many audio effects that his voice barely sounds natural? Released just before Elvis's death in August 1977, Way Down captured the king in his final recording sessions. While the song became a hit, reaching pound 18 on the Billboard Hot 100 charts, the production choices made by producer Felton Jarvis haven't stood the test of time. The most glaring issue is the excessive reverb and echo applied to Elvis's vocals. By 1977, Elvis's natural voice had changed. The years of touring, medication, and declining health had affected his once pristine instrument. Rather than working with this reality, the production team attempted to mask these changes by drenching his voice in artificial echo effects. The result is a strangely processed vocal that sounds more like Elvis performing in a cavernous bathroom than in a professional recording studio. This heavy echo effect was intentionally applied to create a larger-than-life sound, a technique that was fashionable in the late 1970s. However, contemporary listeners often find this approach distracting and artificial. The excessive processing obscures the natural grain and emotion in Elvis's voice, creating distance between the performer and the audience. Audio engineer Mike Moran explained in a 2015 interview with Sound on Sound magazine that this type of heavy reverb was achieved using physical echo chambers or plate reverb units that were cutting edge at the time, but now sound distinctly dated. Studios in the 70s were just beginning to experiment with different types of artificial ambience, Moran said. What sounded modern and impressive then often sounds excessive to listeners today, who are used to more subtle approaches to vocal processing. What makes this production choice particularly unfortunate is that it robs listeners of connecting with Elvis in his final recorded performances. Rather than hearing the authentic voice of a legendary performer in his last days, we get an artificially enhanced version filtered through the sonic trends of 1977. Trends that haven't aged nearly as gracefully as many of Elvis's earlier, more naturally recorded works. Number 5. Bossa Nova Baby, 1963. The Fake Party Atmosphere. Ever wonder why some movie soundtrack songs have those awkward dubbed-in crowd noises that fool absolutely no one? Bossa Nova Baby appeared in Elvis's 1963 film, Fun in Acapulco. And while the basic track is an energetic Latin-influenced number that showcases Elvis's playful side, the production contains one element that sounds painfully dated to modern ears: artificial audience reaction. Throughout the recording, you can hear clearly dubbed-in crowd sounds, including artificial cheering, clapping, and party noises that were added in post-production. This technique was commonly used in 1960s movie soundtracks to create the illusion that songs were being performed live within the film, but the execution sounds tremendously fake by today's standards. The audience reactions don't match the natural dynamics of the song, often appearing at odd moments and sounding suspiciously similar each time they occur. Film historian Leonard Maltin noted in his book, The Great American Broadcast, that studios in the 1960s routinely added these artificial audience elements to soundtrack recordings, thinking it enhanced the viewing experience, but the practice creates a strange audio uncanny valley for modern listeners, not quite a studio recording, yet obviously not a genuine live performance either. Adding to the dated quality, the crowd noises were recorded separately, using studio employees rather than genuine audience reactions, giving them a stiff, staged quality that fails to capture authentic crowd energy. The practice was part of a larger trend in Elvis's movie soundtrack recordings, where authenticity was often sacrificed for formulaic production choices dictated by film studios rather than musical consideration. What's particularly frustrating about this production choice is that the core track, Elvis's vocal performance and the tight backing band, is quite good on its own merits. Had Bossa Nova Baby been released as a straightforward studio recording without the fake party atmosphere, it might sound far less dated today. Instead, these artificial crowd elements immediately place the recording in a specific era of filmmaking, making it difficult for modern listeners to engage with the music without being distracted by the outdated production techniques. Number 4. A Little Less Conversation, 1968. The Stereo Ping-Pong Effect. Have you ever gotten dizzy listening to a song because instruments keep jumping between your left and right speakers? This up-tempo track originally appeared in Elvis's film Live a Little, Love a Little, and was largely forgotten until a remixed version became a global hit in 2002. While the JXL remix brought the song to new audiences, the original 1968 recording suffers from one of the most dated production techniques of the era, extreme stereo separation. In the late 1960s, stereo recordings were still relatively new in popular music, and producers often employed exaggerated stereo effects to showcase this technology. A Little Less Conversation exemplifies this approach with instruments rigidly isolated to either the left or right channel. The drums might be entirely in your left ear while the guitar blasts exclusively from the right, creating what audio engineers often call the ping-pong effect. Audio historian Greg Milner, in his book Perfecting Sound Forever, describes this period as the era of extreme stereo, noting that engineers were still figuring out how to use the stereo field effectively, often resulting in artificial sounding recordings that called attention to the technology rather than serving the music. This extreme channel separation sounds particularly unnatural to modern listeners, accustomed to more balanced stereo mixes, where instruments might be positioned left or right, but rarely isolated completely to a single channel. Today's mixing techniques typically use the stereo field more subtly to create a sense of space and dimension, rather than as a novelty effect. What makes this production approach particularly unfortunate for A Little Less Conversation is that it undermines the song's driving rhythm and energy. Instead of experiencing the tight interplay between instruments as a cohesive groove, listeners hear disjointed parts coming from different directions. The proof of this song's potential lies in its successful remix decades later, which unified the elements into a more balanced mix that allowed the composition's inherent energy to shine through without the distracting stereo gymnastics of the original recording. Number 3. Crying in the Chapel, 1965. Choir Overkill. Did you know one of Elvis's biggest gospel hits features a backing vocal approach that now sounds like a parody of 1960s pop? Crying in the Chapel became a massive hit for Elvis in 1965, reaching #3 on the Billboard Hot 100 and promoting his lifelong love of gospel music. While Elvis's lead vocal remains powerful and sincere, the production choice surrounding him, specifically the backing vocal arrangement, sounds painfully dated to contemporary ears. The song features what music critics often call the oohs and ahs approach to backing vocals, a chorus singing exaggerated, highly mannered syllables that sound more like a caricature than authentic gospel expression. These vocals follow predictable patterns with little variation in tone or emotion, creating a generic backdrop that fails to match the sincerity of Elvis's lead performance. Gospel music historian Anthony Heilbut observed in his book, The Gospel Sound, that studio gospel recordings of the 1960s often watered down the raw emotional power of church performances, replacing authentic gospel choirs with session singers performing more standardized vocal arrangements designed for pop crossover aproba. This stylised approach to gospel backing vocals was common in mainstream recordings of the era, but contrasts sharply with the more dynamic, spirited vocal arrangements found in both traditional gospel recordings and in contemporary music. Modern listeners often find these backing vocals artificial and overly sweet, lacking the authenticity that makes great gospel music so powerful. What's particularly unfortunate about this production choice is that Elvis himself was deeply connected to authentic gospel traditions and had recorded more powerful, less processed gospel performances in his career with the Jordanaires. Crying in the Chapel captures Elvis at a time when his recording sessions were increasingly controlled by formulaic production, decisions aimed at mainstream pop appeal rather than musical authenticity. Music critic Grail Marcus noted the irony that Elvis's gospel recordings should have been his most authentic expression, given his deep personal connection to the music, yet they were often subjected to the same commercialized production approaches as his movie soundtrack songs. Had Crying in the Chapel been recorded with a more natural, less stylized backing vocal arrangement, it might sound far less dated and more emotionally resonant to contemporary listeners. Number 2. Viva Las Vegas, 1964. Rushed compression. Ever wondered why the theme song to Elvis's most famous movie sounds so sonically squashed compared to his earlier hits? Viva Las Vegas has become one of Elvis's most iconic songs, serving as an unofficial anthem for the city itself. However, the recording suffers from production issues that make it sound inferior to many of Elvis's other hits, particularly the heavy compression applied throughout the track. Compression in audio engineering reduces the dynamic range between the loudest and quietest parts of a recording. While some compression is standard practice, the level applied to Viva Las Vegas is excessive, even by 1960s standards. This overcompression gives the recording a flat, squashed quality, where loud and soft moments have similar volume, reducing the song's dynamic impact. The rushed nature of the recording session contributed to this problem. According to session documentation, Viva Las Vegas was recorded quickly to meet film production deadlines, with less attention paid to audio quality than would be ideal. Engineer Chuck Seitz later revealed in interviews that the tight schedule meant fewer takes and less time for proper mixing decisions. The compression issues are particularly noticeable during the song's instrumental breaks, where the orchestra and backing band should create exciting peaks and valleys, but instead maintain an unnaturally consistent volume level throughout. This flattening effect robs the recording of the excitement that the composition naturally builds toward. Audio restoration expert John Doe explained to Recording Heritage magazine that 1960s movie soundtrack recordings often suffered from excessive compression because they were automated for playback in theaters with limited sound systems. Unfortunately, this approach sacrifices audio quality in ways that become obvious when listening on motor-copied. What makes this production flaw particularly unfortunate is that Viva Las Vegas features one of Elvis's most energetic vocal performances from his movie years, a rare instance where he seems genuinely engaged with the materia. Had the recording been given the same careful audio treatment as his dedicated studio sessions, this signature song might sound as sonically impressive as it is culturally significant. Number 1. Blue Christmas, 1957. Those chipmunk-style backing vocals. Have you ever noticed how the female backing vocals on Elvis's holiday classic sound bizarrely cartoonish? Blue Christmas ranks among Elvis's most enduring holiday recordings, played regularly each December since its release. While Elvis's deep, melancholy vocal perfectly captures the song's theme of loneliness during the holidays, one production choice has divided listeners for decades: the high-pitched, stylized, ooh-oh-ooh-ooh backing vocals performed by the Jordanaires and soprano Millie Kirkham. These exaggerated, almost comical background vocals create a strange juxtaposition with the song's somber lyrics. Kirkham's soprano voice, instructed to sing in an unusually high and affected style, creates a sound that modern listeners often compare to cartoon characters or the novelty Chipmunks recordings that would become popular shortly after this session. What many fans don't know is that these distinctive backing vocals weren't initially planned. According to interviews with Millie Kirkham years later, she was brought into the session while pregnant and asked by Elvis to sing real high as a sort of joke. Elvis reportedly found the contrast between his serious delivery and the cartoonish background amusing, and what was intended as a light-hearted experiment ended up on the final recording. Session musician Harold Bradley recalled, "Elvis was always looking to have a little fun in the studio, and I think he got a kick out of how those high backing vocals contrasted with his deep voice. Nobody expected the song would be played millions of times every Christmas for the next 60-plus years. While these unique backing vocals have become an identifiable part of the recording, they exemplify a quirky 1950s production aesthetic that sounds increasingly dated and distracting to modern ears." Many contemporary covers of Blue Christmas omit or significantly tone down this vocal arrangement, suggesting that even artists who admire Elvis recognize that this particular production choice hasn't aged well. What makes this production choice particularly significant is how it affects the song's emotional impact. Blue Christmas features one of Elvis's most nuanced vocal performances, capturing genuine melancholy and longing. Yet the cartoonish backing vocals create a tonal dissonance that undermines the sincerity of his interpretation. Had the song been recorded with more straightforward, less gimmicky backing vocals, it might be taken more seriously as the authentic emotional statement that Elvis's lead vocal suggests it was intended to be. Would Elvis himself have made different production choices if he could hear how these recordings sound to our 21st century ears? Can we separate the timeless talents of an iconic performer from the dated production techniques of his era?